My first experience with CBDM was showing up at the NEZF in 2012 Northeast Zonal Forum. I was just a curious member. And then, as what always happens when we just show up, I was nominated and elected into a position. I became secretary for the next few years, and I've been at the NEZF ever since. That was my first experience with CBDM, and there the CBDM was informal. There was no real policy or procedure in place, just a minimum passing threshold, a phrase of can we live with it, and then generally asking if abstentions or objections wished to speak or if they needed more information to be able to make a decision. And that was my first experience with the idea of in consensus that we're in this together, that we seek out the minority voice, and we actually talk to abstentions, because my experience at area and region was abstentions were something that we either ignored or were annoyed by, like they should better participate or better be informed, or they were just in the way or out of the way because they were ignored or just not counted. And then the minority voices were always just our opposition to trying to get something done. And then in 2014, I was elected regional delegate for Northern New York, and I went to the World Service Conference in 2014, 2016, and 2018. So I got to experience what Laura was talking about. 2014 and 2016 were definitely, they were where I learned that service bodies have steps and recovery too. And I experienced the World Service Conference hitting a bottom in 2014 and 2016. And from that bottom, there was a willingness to change and embrace that change, a second and third step that came out with the process that she was talking about in 2018. In 2017, I was elected the vice chair for the NEZF and got to facilitate with the agenda there. And then with how much we were meeting at that time, and still we're meeting every 2 months on Zoom and twice a year physically. And we discovered we needed a better CBDM process, something more formal. And with the success of the 2018 WSC process, we adopted that last year. And last year I was made the chair of the NEZF and have been facilitating that ever since. So here's my presentation. What is consensus? If we're going to talk about making decisions based on a consensus, it's good to start with what is consensus. Merriam-Webster definitions of consensus are a general agreement, the judgment arrived by most of those concerned, or group solidarity in sentiment and belief. And solidarity stands out to me here because that represents we're in this together, and that really stands out for consensus to me. And then I looked deeper into the origins and construction of the word consensus, and one of the original forms or origins of it was a general accord or agreement of different parts in effecting a given purpose. And personally, I love that. What stands out to me there are the words different parts and purpose. And what this tells me is consensus is purpose driven, that the focus is to affect a given purpose, that the words different parts brings to mind different people with different thoughts, views, desires, belief. And however, that common purpose is what brings us together, or brings together the different parts into a general agreement, which that kind of sounds familiar, like a fellowship we all know about, that's made up of diverse members with wildly differing views, but one common purpose. And then you go down to the breaking up the word. Con comes from com, which means with or together. Sentire comes from to feel or sense. So what I come away from that with is con is with, sense is a sense, us is of the body. So what is consensus? Consensus is purpose-driven agreement made up of different people and parts. We decide and determine that purpose together, facilitated with a sense of the body. So what is different about CBDM? Well, it's purpose-driven. With Robert's rules, for example, with a motion, the wording and the specifics of the motion are what are important. The intent or idea are just there to kind of describe the motion. I'm sure we've all run into needing to make sure that a motion is worded very specifically, because when that motion passes, it's going to be executed just like feeding a program to a computer. It doesn't matter if your intent was the opposite. What the motion is what's going to happen. With CBDM, the intent or idea contained is more important than the actual specific wording. The goal or purpose we are trying to achieve is the focus. The proposed specifics of how we get there are more of a suggestion than a rule. Once we decide on the purpose and idea, we can sort out the how. An example for the difference would be, I motion we order Chinese for X dollars from Y restaurant. The intent is to feed us during an extended area meeting. With that, the focus of the motion is to order Chinese, though the idea is about feeding ravenous GSRs before they eat each other. With CBDM, it could be, I propose we order Chinese food with the intent to feed us during an extended area meeting. And often the first question, I've done this as facilitator when I have different types of proposals coming forward. The first question is not do we want to eat Chinese, but do we want to order food for this extended meal? Are we hungry and do we need to order food? That's the underlying idea. We address the idea first. Is that the destination we want to get to? Yes? Okay. Well, it was suggested that we get Chinese. What do we feel about that? And then go from there. We've already determined where we want to end up. We want to get fed. Sounds like addicts. But how we get there, we work on together. Then it's about hearing all voices. Consensus is, in hearing all voices, we're trying to achieve a general agreement of differing and sometimes disagreeing parts. And to do that, we need to make an effort to hear all those voices. Often in various models of CBDM, even when a proposal technically has consensus, but isn't unanimous, we seek out the minority view. We want to hear, why are you opposing what the majority view is? If the majority is against something and the minority is for something, well, do you have something that we're missing that we need to hear? Is there something that you need to speak to feel heard? Because that is one of the most important things with consensus, is ensuring people feel heard. That gives a lot of the buy-in that was talked about by Laura. By feeling a part of something and knowing that we're in this together gives buy-in to the decision, even if you don't really like the decision. You still feel a part of it and feel heard. And then likewise, quite often when proposals with CBDM, when proposals technically have passing threshold, and this is the way that the WOC process is now and NEZF process is now, even if something has passing threshold, it doesn't automatically just pass like it would with Robert's rules. We immediately open up to discussion because there might be a question that didn't get asked. There might be something we need to hear, might need to reconsider something. And it doesn't hurt to reconsider, think, or talk about it. And if we don't need to, then we don't need to, and it still passes. But if we talk about it and the body shifts one way or the other, well, obviously something needed to be talked about and some point was missed before. That brings us closer to a truer group conscience. And then in getting there together, with all of that said, ultimately consensus-based decision-making is about getting there together, as I've said more than once now. And as was pointed out before, consensus is not about trying to get a decision to pass with 51% and drag along the other 49%. I know if I'm 51% for something and 49% against it, even if it's buying something, I'm gonna have buyer's remorse as soon as I buy it. I'm gonna go, well, did I really, and that's just me personally. You bring in a group of addicts on a group conscience, you're gonna have pretty much half the body upset with what came out of it. That doesn't feel like group conscience to me. But such a simple small majority does not really reflect true group conscience and does not give a sense of the body. All of the efforts, all of the steps along the way in CBDM are designed to hear all voices, majority and minority, for or against, to ensure that even if we don't all exactly agree with something, we know that our voice has been heard and that we are part of the group conscience. Notice I've repeated that a few times. It's about being heard and feeling a part of the group conscience. As long as we feel a part of the group conscience, whatever that group conscience turns out to be, usually we're more okay with and buy into the decision and support it, even if it wasn't what we think is the best idea. But we understand that the decision, a second tradition, is about more than just what I think is a good idea. So I can buy into that this is really truly part of a second tradition decision when I feel heard or we feel heard. And one of the key things about CBDM that I've discovered is with Robert's rules, it always felt like the focus was on I need to be heard. And with CBDM, it always felt like I need you to be heard. So it's kind of a shift of needs. So that's my initial talk about what is consensus in general. It was talked about or pointed out before, CBDM basics on NA.org. Here's a basic flow chart from CBDM basics. I think this is fantastic. This actually can be adapted to pretty much any level of service, any situation. You can write policy around it however you need to for area, region, zone, however. But this very well captures the idea, the underlying ideas of consensus, of hearing everybody and working together to get to a particular purpose. So, and something to keep in mind with CBDM is, unlike other decision-making models like Robert's rules, as was discussed in the introduction, there's no one set way of doing CBDM. There's no one rule book of this is how you do CBDM and this is the only way you do CBDM. Any other way is wrong. We don't have that. CBDM is an underlying set of principles and kind of a way of going about things, a focus on the purpose and hearing all voices. So some service bodies use yes, no, abstain. Some include present, not voting. Some change their voting to things like assent, assent with reservation, stand aside, block, or other variations. Some service bodies have 2/3 as a minimum passing threshold. Some use 3/4. Some use 90%. Some have a separation between a passing threshold and a consensus in a way to help move discussion forward. And that's what you have with the WSC and NEZF process, is you have a minimum passing threshold of 66%, 2/3, but you also have what's called consensus, in which if something's 80%, it just means listen to 2 of the minority voice, make sure that they're heard, but enough of the body is already on board with that to move forward. So unless something gets brought up to really change how we feel about this, we don't need to spend a lot of time hearing each other talk and say the same things in different ways. But the common thread for all of this is, for decisions to be made, they require more than a simple majority. That votes that count towards moving us forward are those that are in favor, not just how many yeses versus how many nos, but how many of the total body are in favor of going this direction. Because if you don't have enough of the total body in favor of going a particular direction, we really don't want to go there. We need more information, more discussion. It needs to go back to the next higher service level, whether it's the regions, areas, groups, whatever. But we're not prepared to move forward with this if you don't have enough of the body in favor of it. But it's that takes it out from being competitive, more about getting there together than competing with each other to get the result we want, or I want. So for a quick walkthrough, because I was sent over some questions on CBDM, figured I would walk through briefly using this. I propose we reopen our home group because I miss our in-person meetings. Introduce proposal. Discuss, clarify. Well, I really miss the hugs and coffee and keychains and fellowship and think we should open the doors again. I know newcomers need us too. Okay. So let's see if there's consensus. So initial vote straw poll, let's say we have 6 yes, 4 no, 2 abstain. Now in Robert's rules, that would probably be considered passing. Done. Well, let's do it. But in consensus, since most versions of CBDM, we only focus on the percent of in favor, that's only 50%. That's not enough. We're lacking something to move forward on this. So let's talk about it. And you start off with concerns. Yeah, nope, discussion needed. So let's hear what's going on. So concerns are raised about not being careful about reopening. So that's why I abstained. Or someone mentions that they were opposed because they're worried about hugging being mentioned and not following local enforced social distancing guidelines or whatever. Okay. So hearing concerns, but wanting to see what the sense of the body is for the underlying idea of reopening, a facilitator could ask, you know, aside from all the concerns listed, if we sort out everything to meet local requirements, meeting responsibly, whatever is needed, how many would like to reopen our home group? Like getting a sense of what support is for the underlying idea of, do we want to reopen our home group? Well, that question gets 8 yes, 2 no. So that tells the facilitator, you know what, we want to reopen our home group. We just don't agree with how. With motions, you'd have to focus on the how more than the intent. You'd have to iron out all the details of how we're going to do this, and then it would be accomplished. But in this case, no, we want to do this if we can do it right. So we're in favor of the idea. So sounds like pretty strong consensus. Before moving forward, would 2 no's like to be heard? Well, the 1 no, the proposal maker speaks up about not believing in following social distancing, but really not wanting to miss the hugs. The other no doesn't want to speak up. The facilitator asks the rest of the body, does that change anything? Are we still feeling the same? Yeah, everyone still feels the same. The proposal maker isn't really happy and doesn't want to accept it, but with nothing new to add the discussion, the facilitator moves forward, and then you start cycling through this whole process one piece at a time to iron out each of the pieces that you want to add to it to complete the how you're going to accomplish the idea. It's really not difficult or complicated. And then there's also this flowchart that I made after the NEZF adopted the WSC 2018 CBDM process. This flowchart shows you can really take a proposal in and move through a logical step-by-step process to where proposal comes in, you straw poll. If there's 80% or more for or against something, then you ask if there's 2 in consensus that wish to speak. And the idea behind that is if you're already that much for or against something, then you probably don't need to spend a lot of time discussing it. If you have something, if someone raises a point that does shift the body, if the consensus shifts, you know, now we need to talk about this. There's something that changed here. We need to walk through this. But underneath all of this, and this is really very step by step, and this is the same process the NEZF follows, and it is very step by step, one piece at a time, and we navigate a lot of business this way. Nothing is done until it's done. Nothing has to be set in stone, and you don't have to act on something until the body is ready to act on it and has all the details figured out together. You don't, if you get to a point where you have a strong amount of abstentions, what that tells me as a facilitator is the sense of the body is we don't have enough information. We're not really against this idea, but we need to flesh it out more. So it either needs to go back to our whatever service body, or it needs to go to a work group, but we're not ready to act on this, but we're not really dismissing it either. So in all of this, it really does come down to listening and getting a sense of the body. So in that, thank you for letting me serve. My quick closing thoughts, I guess, would be just to reiterate, there's no right way of doing CBDM, but there are plenty of ways of doing it wrong.